Harry, why is there the bad stereotype about Mediterraneans, Asians eating low animal products? It's bullshit. Just thinking about Sardinians and Asian people eating everything is moving, even insects. Exactly. Oh, look, it's a lot of academics that are basically ivory tower academics, completely disconnected from reality, Michael. Absolutely disconnected. It's ridiculous. But that's the reality. If you look out there, people, it's like the questionnaires that Mary Ruddock, when we were talking about the blue zones on my channel, I had Mary Ruddock, and she's a nutritional scientist, and she was a vegetarian. Then she came to Greece and to check the blue zones out, of all things. Met a Greek man, which she's partnered with, and she still goes to Africa and other places, goes to traditional societies doing research. But she decided to go and actually see exactly what these people are eating in Ikaria. She was shocked. She goes basically to these villages in these remote areas where the people that live the longest and all their gravestones are over 100. And she goes, what are they eating? And she sees these grandmothers eating raw, eating certain raw animal foods and eating basically dairy and eating a whole lot of different goats and chickens and you name it, pork. Old men at lunchtime eating pork belly and basically organ meats. This old lady that was, 80s or 90s. I can't even remember now. I think she was very old anyway, and she was still running her own restaurant and cooking organ meats. And pretty much, she was shocked because this is what she actually looked at the studies, went back and looked at the studies and realized, one, because of husband, her partner, he basically, explained a lot of things to her, because meat in Greece, when we say meat, the word meat, we mean beef. We don't mean goat, we don't mean lamb, we don't mean pork, we don't need any of those. We use their own generic names. So when you get a translation, completely lost in the translation. So when you say to Greeks, do you eat meat? They say, no, occasionally, which they mean occasionally they eat beef. That's what they mean. But that gets lost in the translation because of the language reality, where Greeks eat far more like goat and lamb and pork, though, and a bit of chicken here and there and a bit of fish. But the big ones are pork and lamb, the two big ones. That's what the two big main ones that they eat. Most of Greece, only a few areas in Greece where they eat cattle, where they eat basically beef, and that's in northern Greece, and then one of the big islands in the to the north of Athens, where there is. They've traditionally, from antiquity, consumed beef more than some of the other animals. So that's the thing. And when they did this sort of and asked these questionnaires, it didn't even include dairy. There was no dairy, even though these people are pastoralists. They've got their own goats and produce their own dairy products. So there was no dairy question in the actual questionnaire. There was only a whole lot of plants and only meat, none of the other animal foods. So basically, not even fish. So basically, all these people basically said a bit of a small amount of meat, which is what they do, a small amount of beef that gets imported to the island, and the rest is basically plants. And so, these people thought that they were calorie restricting and eating, mainly plants and all that. So that's the picture that they got. Completely and utterly false. Because if they had actually had all in their food questionnaires, all the different food that exist, they would have got a completely different picture. Yes, they would have got, because they still consume about a third of their diet comes from plants, 2/3 comes from animal foods, but the majority comes from animal foods. And the plants are not plants like we're not talking about here. They don't eat. They, pretty much there's only one bakery there. People don't really eat bread. They don't really eat any cereals and stuff like that. It's primarily some tubers, some fruit seasonally, and the rest is pretty much like mainly green plants, like cooked vegetables. That's it, with the meat, just to give it some bulk. That's basically what it is primarily. So it's sort of a low carb diet in a sense. That's what they really eat on Ikaria, and it's mainly an animal based low carb diet. But unless you go there to physically see these people, what they're eating, you don't get that message. You get a message from the nutritionist nonsense that's completely devoid of reality. That's the problem with the blue zones, because we've got academics which are biased and provide questionnaires to the locals which are translated. So the Americans give these questionnaires to the Greek academics. The Greek academics translate them, and then they send out field people, young people, to hand these questionnaires to people, get them filled out. Then they go and collect them. Then they basically retranslate them back, um, you know, or they fill in the English questionnaires online, and then they basically post them back to the academics in America, and then those academics basically do their studies. So you can see garbage in, garbage out. So what's new and then they make adjustments and all sorts of stuff. It's completely and utter bonkers. This is the problem of basically these so-called epidemiological questionnaires, which are so bogus and so corrupt in terms. This is not controlled studies. It's just bullshit. I have lived in the Mediterranean. I lived for 6 years in Greece as a youngster from the age of about 12 to 18. And pretty much I saw exactly what people ate. And it was basically, even my great grandfather lived on dairy and meat, hated vegetables, and lived to 107. My grandfather disliked vegetables as well, and basically consumed dairy and meat, and only died at 87 due to pneumonia. Not because he had any illness. He would have lived longer if he didn't get a severe influenza, and get a severe, problems. Would have had better vitamin D status if he had consumed certain other foods in the mountains. But so be it. Shit happens. And so the reality is, if he had survived that, he probably would have gone on to live as long as his father. And so these people are telling me that the Inuit, they got centenarians amongst themselves, only ate meat. You take a look at the people, the Maasai, over 100. Mary Ruddock actually met some of them, even these old ladies that were jumping up and down and basically were over 100. And still had the energy of younger people. Our 40-year-olds couldn't do that. She couldn't keep up with an 80-year-old Maasai warrior that running up a hillside, and she's in her mid 40s. And quite fit compared to Western standards, lean, fit, and on a low carb diet, and couldn't keep up. I mean, that shows a lifetime of ancestral living compared to any. These people, I have no idea. I've lived amongst, and it's basically, the majority of stuff is cooked vegetables. You don't get a lot of starch, and a lot of these people are physically active as well in a lot of these societies. Even the small amount of starch is glycogen replacement than anything else. And they basically eat anything that, because in the past there wasn't a lot of nutrients around. Things were the pickings were thin on the ground, and you ate what you could get your hands on. So it absolutely is bullshit. And I've seen cooking in Asia, a lot of it's sort of a lot of vegetables cooked with any meat that they can find, and whether it's insects, fish, chicken, whatever. It doesn't matter what the meat is, they'll find it and they'll put it in with the vegetables, grab some bulk, and add a bit of additional nutrition in a nutrient, because they basically are undernourished in many cases because of the poverty in these societies. So it's ridiculous, all this sort of stuff. And we know that even from the Second World War, many Europeans that were born inside the Second World War, and suffered starvation, actually ended up, because of the severe autophagy and stuff like that, actually end up, the ones that survived, living longer as well. So, and we know that the populations, other people that didn't suffer that starvation, actually lived less, when we look back at the research. So we know that calorie restriction has a benefit as well. And most of these populations, even though they ate some plants, they also calorie restricted. But we don't see that amongst the Inuit and the Maasai, which eat a lot of food. They don't calorie restrict and eat a lot of animal foods, but they've got a low insulin to glucagon. They don't have these high growth pathways because they don't have even pure glucose is still 4-to-1 in terms of insulin to glucagon in the ratio. You still get far more, let alone when you have a mixed diet, much higher. It's just because they're calorie restricting in these societies. Now they're not. That's why they're getting all fat, engaging the Randall cycle, by pushing up the growth factors much more rapidly, with excess energy coming from fat and sugar. Now, then they didn't get enough and they depleted those and they never engaged that Randall cycle. So, yeah, you have to understand the nuancing, and that's the problem. Modern people just don't get the nuancing. And so, yeah, we're all over the place.